The way that I determine who to trust is whether people were skeptical of the official narrative, but were basing that in data. So, for example, one of the people who I personally trust is a guy named Dr. Marty Makary from Johns Hopkins University. Very early on, he and I talked pretty much every week on the show, and very early on, he was very skeptical of the lockdowns. He was very skeptical of the idea that if you're 20 years old, you shouldn't be working, or that we should be not treating people who are 20 in a different way than we were treating people who are 70, for example. Because he was skeptical of that, but he was taking the science pretty seriously, I had a lot of respect for that. Same thing with Bhattacharya from Stanford. If you just bought hook, line, and sinker the actual official narrative throughout, and the idea, and you never cited the data, if you ever at any point said, the science says, then I have pretty much a problem with you, because science is a process. Science is not a person or an institution. And so there's sort of a group of people who I think were skeptical of some of the narratives, and who would do a good job. It's the same way you decide who to trust in politics. They do a good job sort of steel manning the other argument and then saying, okay, and here's where I think the flaws are. And they'd give a nuanced picture of the data, as opposed to people who are just like, you listen to me, and if you don't listen to me, you're an idiot. In which case, I think pretty much always you don't listen to those people.
I'm Dave Rubin, and joining me today is the founding editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire, the host of the Ben Shapiro Show, author of the new book, The Authoritarian Moment, How the Left Weaponized America's Institutions Against Dissent, and the fastest talking Jew on all of the internet. Ben Shapiro, welcome back to the Rubin Report.
Hey, good to talk to you.
All right, my friend. First off, I Googled that, and you did come up as fastest talking Jew on the internet. How do you feel about that?
I mean, accurate. Also, I don't know whether to be flattered or insulted, but it is what it is. Life, reality, facts don't care about my feelings. It's all right.
Facts do not care about your feelings. All right, so look, we're going to get into the book, obviously. This is what, your 87th book or 95th, or where are we at now?
Yeah, something like that. I can never remember. It's either my 11th or 12th, depending on the count.
Yeah, it's a lot of books. As a guy who just finished my second, I admire someone that has written this many books. But let's just start sort of just generally with what's going on in the world, which will kind of get us to the book, because that's really what this is all about. COVID's a little bananas right now, or at least the reaction to COVID. Where are you at this point with the whole thing?
So the pandemic is over as far as I'm concerned from a public policy perspective. That does not mean that the pandemic is technically over. You can walk outside without vaccination, without mask, everything's fine. But what it does mean is that all public policy is designed to do is achieve certain objectives. Originally, we were told that the public policy with regard to COVID was designed to prevent the overrunning of the hospitals. And so we all locked down and we all masked up, and then we prevented the overrunning of the hospitals. And then the idea was, okay, well, now we're going to delay indefinitely until we can get to the vaccine. And then these miraculous vaccines came around, and the idea was, okay, the vaccines are now available. And then we said, okay, well, we'll wait until every adult has had the chance to either take it or not take it, as the case may be, because they are super duper effective. And now we've reached that. And now the problem is there's no actual next goal. And this is something that is driving me up a wall. If you listen to people on CNN or MSNBC or in the administration talk, it seems that the goal is zero COVID, like every single person in the United States getting the vaccine and then COVID just going away. And no one actually thinks this is ever going to happen. This is a disease that has been seeded over every country pretty much on planet Earth. It's taken a minimum of 4 million lives, probably closer to 6 million if you look at the actual stats from India. And certainly if you include the actual number of dead from China, a lot more lives than that. And the notion that this is just going to go away if we yell at people to get the vaccine is crazy, which means to me that basically now that every adult has had the opportunity to take the vaccine, and because, thank God, this disease is not really affecting kids in severe ways, like the total number of kids under the age of 18 who have died is still under 350 in a subpopulation of 75 million, we're done. I mean, as far as what public policy can accomplish or should seek to accomplish, we are pretty much done at this point. And the problem for the left is that they set as a goal the idea of zero COVID back last year, and now they can't let go of it. So Biden is kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, he wants to declare COVID over so we can all go back to work and everybody can enjoy life and he can say that he beat the thing. On the other hand, he's actually, in order to do that, he has to acknowledge that we have to live with the virus, which would open the can of worms that last year Democrats said we should certainly not live with the virus. And anybody who said we should live with the virus, like Governor DeSantis in Florida, was bad and evil. So instead, we're going to get this ridiculous specter of people trying to scare you into being okay with giving up liberties that really, at this point, there's no scientific rationale for. So you're going to continue masking your kid, even though, again, this thing is not radically damaging to children. I mean, 810 kids died of pneumonia in the same period that COVID killed something like 350 kids over the course of the last year and a half or so. You're supposed to mask up your kid to protect a 40-year-old who decided not to get the vaccine. Or if you're vaccinated, you're supposed to mask up in case, God forbid, you give it to somebody who, again, decided not to get the vaccine. Like that, none of that is good public policy. So I'm annoyed by it. I'm frustrated by it. I also think it's a bad incentive structure because I don't know why who, according to people, the powers that be, did the right thing. I got vaccinated. My wife got vaccinated. My parents got vaccinated. Why am I supposed to penalize myself by masking up to protect people who are overtly not only not vaccinating, but also saying they don't care whether I wear a mask or not? It's bizarre.
What would you say to those people at this point? Because there obviously are a lot of people. I think it might be as many as something like 30 to 40% of American adults that are not vaccinated that are saying, I either had it and I have the antibodies, or I just don't want this vaccine, which basically was produced in about a year, or whatever reasons that might have. What would you say to those people at this point?
So number one, you're a free and independent human being. You're an adult, and it's your decision. That's number one. Number two, if we're talking about you already had COVID, I certainly see the rationale. There's some pretty good data suggesting the natural immunity is as strong, if not stronger, than vaccine immunity. What I would say is that for a lot of people, the given evidence shows, depending on your age and depending on your health factors, that your rate of death from COVID outweighs the rate of adverse effects from the vaccine so far as the data that we have yet seen. And this is pretty much true for everybody above the age of 18. I haven't seen the data between 12 and 18 so much, and certainly for kids. I have very little interest in vaccinating my 7, 5, and 1-year-old at this point. But if you're 35 years old or 40 years old and you're saying, well, you know, I thought I got COVID. I'm hearing a lot of this. I thought I got COVID, but I wasn't actually tested for COVID. I'm sure I had it before. Well, unless you were tested for it, it might have been something else, right? There are a lot of other sicknesses going around. I was sick several times during COVID pandemic, never got COVID. So don't rely on that. Take into account your own risk factors, and then seriously consider getting the vaccine, because frankly, the risks from the vaccine, from what I'm seeing in the data, are not particularly high. And the risks from COVID are, depending on your age, maybe somewhat higher, maybe multiple times higher. But again, I respect your ability as an individual to choose as long as you're willing to live with the consequences. If you don't get the vaccine and then you get sick, you know, that would be a you problem. Don't come to public policy seeking a solution.
Right. To that point, though, how have you, in the last year, have you figured out who you can trust or what institutions you can trust? Because it seems to me we've just seen a complete collapse across the board, political, cultural, journalistic, just the entire thing has completely collapsed. And that's what people ask me almost more than anything else at this point. Dave, who do you trust? How do you figure out how to make some sense of this?
I mean, the way that I determine who to trust is whether people were skeptical of the official narrative, but were basing that in data. So, for example, one of the people who I personally trust, a guy named Dr. Marty Makary from Johns Hopkins University, very early on, he and I talked pretty much every week on the show, and very early on, he was very skeptical of the lockdowns. He was very skeptical of the idea that if you're 20 years old, you shouldn't be working, or that we should be not treating people who are 20 in a different way than we were treating people who are 70, for example. Because he was skeptical of that, but he was taking the science pretty seriously, I had a lot of respect for that. Same thing with Bhattacharya from Stanford. If you just bought hook, line, and sinker the actual official narrative throughout, and the idea, and you never cited the data, if you ever at any point said, the science says, then I have pretty much a problem with you, because science is a process. Science is not a person or an institution. And so there's sort of a group of people who I think were skeptical of some of the narratives, and who would do a good job. It's the same way you decide who to trust in politics. They do a good job sort of steel manning the other argument and then saying, okay, and here's where I think the flaws are. And they'd give a nuanced picture of the data, as opposed to people who are just like, you listen to me, and if you don't listen to me, you're an idiot, in which case I think pretty much always you don't listen to those people.
Right. So this will kind of segue us to the book. But are you surprised in the last year? I remember like 2 or 3 weeks into COVID, it was one of the many times in the past year that Ben Shapiro has trended on Twitter, because you said the very obvious statement, in essence, that we are going to have to live with a certain amount of death. A certain amount it's just what actuaries have to deal with when they're figuring out insurance rates. And that's just the reality of life. And of course, everyone in Media Matters and all the usual clowns were saying that Ben Shapiro wants to kill old people and everything else. But related to that, are you sort of surprised how quickly everyone folded? And even now, you can sense that there's a certain amount of people in the media that want lockdowns again. They want more government programs. Like they're getting off on this. They just like it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that is very true. I think that this has become almost a pagan worship ceremony for a lot of people. Because again, I'm not anti-masking under certain circumstances. I'm not anti-masking for unvaccinated people who are with other unvaccinated people who are vulnerable to COVID. I mean, I was never anti-Fauci until he started pretty much overtly lying to us in a wide variety of cases. I've been pro-vaccine throughout this entire pandemic. So yeah, I find it shocking, however, the number of people who are much more interested in castigating people who are using their own independent risk assessment and coming to a different conclusion, or analyzing the data in a different way, but looking at the data. I'm shocked at the number of people who have decided that they are more interested in the partisan virtue signaling than in even examining the data. That's the part that I find really shocking. And the eagerness with which people are going back to, well, you're not masking. This is where it's going to go, right? They're going to say, the CDC will issue some sort of guidance saying if you're vaccinated, you ought to mask up. And I'm going to say no. I've already said no. I've vaccinated. I am not transmitting the disease. The numbers of people who are asymptomatically transmitting COVID while vaccinated is very low. The number of breakthrough infections is very, very low. According to the New York Times, there are 160 million people vaccinated in the United States. There have been something like 6,000 breakthrough cases. I'm not masking up for that. And most of all, it's one thing to make the case that I should mask up if somebody can get the disease through no fault of their own. But if you've had the opportunity to get a vaccine and then you didn't, and then I give you COVID, that one is kind of on you. That's really not on me anymore. But there will be this move, like if somebody says that you need to mask up despite being vaccinated and you say no, then it will be back to, oh, you're willing to kill grandma. It's like, no, I was never willing to kill grandma. But it's become much more about the partisan. It's why you see people yelling at people who are unvaccinated, right? It's not because they actually want to convince those people to vaccinate. If you want to convince somebody to vaccinate, you do what I said earlier. You treat them as an individual human being. You take a look at their risk factors. You try to analyze those on an individual level and assuage the fears. If you want to create a sort of polarized, you're a bad person, I'm a good person thing, then when you say you're an idiot and a moron if you don't vaccinate on my timeline as I see fit, and no matter your prior health scenario.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop yelling, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.